right, so today is day 2, and we're going to go over therefore statement.
But first, we're going to do a quick debrief on what we did yesterday. I think those of you that are new, Karishma caught you guys up, but just for everybody, to kind of give you a rundown again. So what is a resolution? A resolution, especially the type that you're making for school boards or your peer leadership teams at school, basically express the need and your student body's group opinion on climate change, and it can be passed by any organization, although right now we're focusing on schools, and it can support a certain piece of legislation, but often for school boards we avoid making it political. And a whereas statement specifically, which is what we worked on yesterday, is where that's at the beginning of the resolution. As you can see on the side there's some examples, and it basically just states why you're asking for what you're asking for. It'll show what your school has already done for climate change, and then you'll move on to the therefore statements, which we're going to talk about today, which is where you ask for what you want.
Yep. And today we're going to be going over therefore statements, as I mentioned earlier. So these statements establish actions the group will take, or things that they agree on. So a couple examples are, a group acknowledging that climate change is a threat to our community, or calling on Congress to take swift action on climate legislation. So there are a lot of options for what you can do with these therefore statements, but looking at a couple of the examples from the past, you'll probably see some of the same ones pop up. Then there are also therefore statements that can establish long-term changes. These are much more difficult to pass, so you have to talk to your team and your group and decide if you're willing to wait longer to get these in place, because it's likely that you'll have multiple editing sessions on these. You'll have to talk to a deputy superintendent and a super and all sorts of people to see if these changes are really possible. But there is a lot that you can do and a lot of change you can generate in your community with them. Some examples are annual reports on sustainability projects. With these, you get to analyze metrics from previous projects, and you get to have a student report on them and give insight on future projects. And that ensures that just because your school is doing things for sustainability now, it doesn't mean they're going to do it in the future. But with the annual report, it does put in a system where they're going to continue renewing those projects. Another thing you can do is create sustainability projects. So if there's specific things that you're seeing in your school that you don't like, things like, you're using a lot of plastic in your cafeterias, or you notice that you have real grass on your fields and not turf, and that's taking up a lot of water, you can suggest specific projects that you want to see changed in your schools. And the third thing is climate committees. This is the most difficult because it's the most permanent, and it requires the most time from the district because they have to actually appoint people to sit on the committee. But if your school has absolutely no infrastructure for sustainability, they've never had any sustainability projects, this might be a good option for you, because the others do require some foundational support from the school board already. So with the climate committee, essentially it's a group of people who would be talking about sustainability, and they'd be doing some of the things that the annual reports and the sustainability projects do. They'd be thinking about where can we be more sustainable, where can we reduce our carbon footprint. They would do cost benefit analyses to see which projects are feasible to do for each campus, and then they would generate annual reports once the projects are in motion. So you can see why that would be a lot more work than any of the other two. But if there's no infrastructure already there for you at your school, you might have to go with that option. Now, how to write these therefore statements. There's 3 basic steps on the screen. The first is you need to think about what you want the council to agree on. Do you want them to acknowledge the threat of climate change? Do you want them to call on Congress to pass climate legislation? Part of the way to kind of think about this is think for yourselves about what the importance to you is with the resolution. Like, why are you writing it? What do you want it to accomplish? The second one is really big because I think I've said this before, but as youth, a lot of us don't have the power to vote. And so getting these resolutions to call on Congress to pass climate legislation is a symbolic vote for us. It shows them that the entire student body is passionate about climate. They want to see legislation, and it shows these representatives that the next generation of voters is going to vote for climate legislation. So for a lot of us, that's really important. Number two, you need to think about what changes you want to see. This is more for the long-term statements. So you just need to think about your school, think about what changes you have seen in the past, think about what changes you want to see, what impact you want to leave on your own community, and try to integrate that into the statements you're writing. And the third step is to look at other resolutions. Look at our template and other resolutions on Schools for Climate Action for words that match your goals. If you can't find anything, you can draft it yourself, but these are kind of like legal documents. It's kind of difficult to write and word things yourself and figure out how to do that, which is why we suggest looking at other people's work. But if you, my school, we actually did end up writing our own therefore statement, and it worked out really well. You'll probably need help from a superintendent or a board member, but if there's something unique or specific that you want to get accomplished, then that's definitely an option. And I think now we are going to go into some breakout rooms to brainstorm the long-term changes you want to see. So right now we're not really worried about getting this into writing, just thinking about you can, do whatever ridiculous thing you can think of, like, we're going to have EV school buses, which cost a lot of money, but brainstorm whatever you want, and we'll put it into feasible therefore statements in the next room. For those of you who are catching up online through recordings, we're recording this after the workshop to fill you in on everything that you missed. And if you're following along and you're not in the workshop, this is kind of some of the steps that you want to go through to finish off your resolution. So we first took time to write the first three therefore statements. These are things that the council should agree on. On the last statement, if you're using our template, there's a couple of blanks that you have to fill in. It shouldn't take you too long. And the first two to three are relatively standard. So there's framework for it already on the template. You essentially just have to copy paste it and change the wording a little bit according to what you prefer. There's also one statement calling on Congress to enact legislation including carbon fee and dividend. The only thing to be careful of there is if you live in a more conservative district or somewhere where people might have issues with specific types of policy, you might want to be careful about endorsing carbon fee and dividend specifically, and might want to expand it to just climate legislation in general. Next, we worked on the long-term statement. So there's one statement in the entire resolution that is creating some sort of long-term impact, and this is an optional statement. But some people were creating ad hoc superintendent committees, some people are instituting annual reviews, and other people are creating their own innovative statements on their own. So there is framework for the annual report and for the ad hoc committee already on the template. If you're interested in either of those, all you have to do is come up with a couple of sustainable projects you'd like to see on your campus and fill out pretty much the blanks. And one thing we do advise is not to get too attached to the statement, because once you start the process of talking to individual board members and getting feedback, you might find that they don't believe one or these statements is super feasible, and they might make you change the wording slightly or change it completely. So feel free to be liberal with these and have fun with them and put down whatever you want, but do know that you might have to make some changes. And finally, we showed this slide. We have a rough draft deadline for the resolutions, which is the third day, the asynchronous day of the workshop. If you are trying to follow along with the workshop and try and get the resolution done in 1 week, then on your third day, you're going to want to just fill in anything that you need to get caught up on with the whereas statements and the therefore statements before, giving a draft to any board members or emailing it to someone if you're in contact with us and getting help from us. That's pretty much all you missed. We hope that you're able to get caught up. And again, feel free to email anyone with questions.
Hey, Karishma, I have a question. What's the difference between an ad hoc and non-ad hoc committee?
Krishma, what's the difference between proposing an ad hoc committee and then proposing a sustainable index or an annual report, basically?
Great question, Katie. So starting with the report, if you ask for an annual report, it does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it consolidates metrics on any sustainability projects on any that your school has already conducted. And this can be projects that were conducted for the purpose of sustainability or, for cost efficiency or anything else. So that can be things like installing solar panels, installing EV chargers, switching real grass fields to turf. Anything like that has saved water, electricity, energy, something like that. So if we take those metrics and put them into a one-page document, and the person responsible for that is either the superintendent or a designee that the superintendent appoints. And then it also has a system of review embedded in it. So that designee or the superintendent will also write a couple pages saying, these projects were great and the metrics looked really good, so we should renew that project for next year. And the metrics for this project weren't so good, so maybe we should consider abandoning it. And here are some new projects that we should propose for the next year. And then you have a student representative who does the same thing, but they also bring in concerns from the student body. So they can do things like, if students are really concerned by the fact that the sinks they run on a timer as opposed to with sensors and they're wasting a lot of water. Or maybe students think that teachers aren't turning off lights in their classrooms when they leave and those should operate on a sensor. Any kind of changes that students are seeing that they're concerned about, they can bring to their student representative who will write it into the report, and that can potentially become a future sustainability project or something that the board looks into. So the bottom line is that the report consolidates metrics for any sustainability projects, puts it in one place. The district representative is going to create a review on any current projects and proposals for new projects. And the student representative does the same while integrating the concerns of the student body. So those are the three things that the annual report establishes. Now, the ad hoc committee, which the wording is right here, does a little bit more than that. So the ad hoc committee does also have a system of review. They do a couple of different things. So the ad hoc committee means that the superintendent on their own discretion can appoint representatives to the committee. So if they decide, if the superintendent thinks that this isn't a good use of time currently, maybe during COVID, maybe worrying about climate and sustainability isn't a good use of the district's time. So they can suspend the committee or stop it for that year and then reinstate it later. Basically, the ad hoc committee and the wording here just gives the superintendent the purview to do what they want with the committee. But what the committee does is number one, they review current and future facilities, operations, and projects to assess their environmental impact. So that's kind of like the metrics or the report, where they're looking at our current facilities. They're seeing, our lawns are taking up a lot of grass, are taking up a lot of water, we should replace it with turf and things like that. Then they perform cost benefit analyses. So they say, if we were to change it to turf, how much would that cost? How much money would we save in water in the next couple of years? Is it worth it to make this change? Then they can also incorporate environmental education into different curricula. This is optional. You can take this out, you can include it. You can have this committee do whatever really that you want when you're writing this. And then obviously when you begin talking to representatives, they might say, you know what, I don't think the superintendent's gonna like this, let's take this out and whatnot. So there's gonna be a bit of a push and pull. And then here, it's basically just engaging with local representatives to advocate for climate policies. So that's just basically encouraging them to look at climate policies and to enact them, or sending this resolution of support to different groups. And then finally, they can investigate whatever sustainability projects you want to see on your campuses. So that can be, refillable water stations, solar panels, EV chargers, whatever you want to see implemented, you can ask them to investigate. So basically, they will look into it, they'll perform that cost benefit analysis that we talked about earlier. And then they will take all of this to the superintendent and the board and in one big report and ask them to approve what projects they want to have in the future. So bottom line is that the climate committee is going to perform a bunch of actions to look at each school's current carbon footprint. They are going to perform cost-benefit analyses on potential future projects, and they're going to investigate whatever sustainability projects you suggest that they investigate, in addition to whatever ones they want to investigate or that the superintendent is interested in. And then hopefully they will get approved by the District Board of Trustees to actually enact some of those projects that they're suggesting. Does that make sense, Katie? Yep, and to answer Kieran's earlier question, now that we've gone over what a committee is, the ad hoc committee basically means that it's there when necessary. It's not a permanent committee. So the superintendent, as I said earlier, like if there's another issue going on with, COVID or whatever issues going on currently, the superintendent can dismantle the committee for some time and then put it back up. Whereas if you took out that wording and made it just a Superintendent's Climate Action Advisory Committee, it would be like a permanent committee that meets regularly and it's always there, not just one that works when necessary.